Welcome to Dear 21-Year-Old Me, where we ask our guest what they'll say to their 21-year-old self and go back in time and discover how they celebrated their 21st birthday. He's your host, Jeremy Irvine.
Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Dear 21-Year-Old Me. Great to have you along wherever you are around the world. Today we catch up with songwriter, composer and performer John Bucchino. John's songs have been performed and recorded by renowned artists, including Art Garfunkel, Liza Minnelli, Christian Chenoweth, Audra McDonald and David Campbell, on whose CD Taking the Wheel I discovered John's music way back in the late 1990s. John has won many awards over the years. He's written scores for the musicals Urban Myths, Lavender Girl, Broadway's A Caged Affair, It's Only Life, and the DreamWorks animated film Joseph, King of Dreams, as well as lyrics for the children's musical Simeon's Gift. The legendary Stephen Schwartz said John's songs have, quote, insightful lyrics and gorgeous melodies, rich harmonic textures and subtle inner voicings. At a personal level, John's music has been a constant for me since I bought David Campbell's CD all those years ago, from the Go Get 'Em, Taking the Wheel, to the heart-wrenching If I Ever Say I'm Over You, and it is a heart-wrencher, that one, John, to the joyful That Smile. John's songs have been a series of musical chapters as my life has changed over the decades, and I thank John for that. Stephen Schwartz said John's music is inner voicing, which when you listen to John's music makes complete sense. But before we meet John, let's go back in time to the year 1972 to find out what was happening when John was turning 21. In the US, 5 White House operatives are arrested for burglarizing the offices of the Democratic National Committee, a saga which becomes known as the Watergate scandal. HBO begins as a pay TV service. It goes on to air shows such as The Wire, The Soprano, and The Brilliant Band of Brothers, while Atari kicks off the first generation of video games. Parents have never had so much fun ever since. Just 5 more minutes. No, I'm not going to clean my room. With the release of their seminal arcade version of Pong, the first game to achieve commercial success. I remember, actually, my parents buying us an Atari system in the early 80s, and we just thought it was fantastic how technology has changed. The Godfather movie debuts. It was the highest grossing film of 1972 and was for a time the highest grossing film ever made, earning between $250 and $291 million at the box office. The television series MASH, Wonderful MASH, begins its run on CBS this year. 256 episodes aired over 11 seasons. The final episode, Goodbye, Farewell and Amen, remains the highest non-sports or news program broadcast ever in the US, with over 105 million people tuning in to see Hawkeye and friends literally say goodbye. And in music, Roberta Flack's The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face reached the top spot for 6 weeks on the charts and became the number 1 song at year's end. And Stephen Schwartz's Pippin. Love Pippin. Really good musical. Debuts on Broadway. It includes the song Corner of the Sky, which became my audition song for the shows I did. I still remember the terror of auditioning and trying to keep your knees from making less noise shaking than your voice. John Farnham's take of Corner of the Sky on the 1974 Australian cast recording is a great version, and I'll pop a link into the show notes. Stephen Schwartz, Pippin's creator, later describes himself as, quote, an ardent and lifelong fan of our guest, John Bucchino. It's the year 1972. John, welcome. You heard the introduction when we stepped back to 1972, which was the year that you turned 21. What do you remember about that year, and what was your actual 21st birthday like?
I thought about this. I don't have a great first of all, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. And going back, way back to 1972, I was I was in my second year of college. I remember that my parents moved from Philadelphia, where I was born, and they were born, Pennsylvania, the East Coast, to the Palm Springs area of California when I was 12, which was quite a shock to my little pubescent system, suddenly being in sunshine, yes, and there was no snow and everybody was swimming, which I didn't know how to do, and it was all very exotic.
A little bit of a change.
So a big giant change, yeah. And so I remember around my 21st birthday, and maybe it even included the actual date, we flew back to Philadelphia to visit our family.
Right.
And so my parents asked me what I wanted for my 21st birthday, kind of a big deal. Yep. And I said that I wanted to go to New York City.
Fantastic.
Because I had never been to New York City, and it sounded just dazzling and like Oz, not your kind of Oz, but the Wizard of Oz.
Ironic, given your friendship with the creator of such musical.
Yeah. And the fact that were it not for me, such musical would probably not exist. That's a good story, which I'll tell you later.
Yes, it's a very good story.
So anyway, so my dad said, sure, it's about an hour and a half train ride from Philadelphia to New York City. And what I wanted to do was go to museums, go to art museums. So we took the train, and I remember we may have gone to the Metropolitan Museum, but the one that I really wanted to go to was the Guggenheim, which is the Frank Lloyd Wright designed sort of swirl of a building. And I was just in heaven. It was really exotic being there. And excuse me. And that was my wish for my 21st birthday. And plus, of course, in Philadelphia, my giant Italian family made a big old fuss. So that didn't hurt either. I'm sure my grandmother made lasagna. And that's what I recall about my 21st birthday.
Wonderful. Do you remember any presents you got? I mean, the presents obviously sound like the trip back to the East Coast.
The trip was sort of the big, the trip was the big present. And other than that, no, I don't remember.
As a teen, it would have been a huge change, as you said, growing up on the East Coast, the snow and, distinct culture, then going to Palm Springs. Sorry, you go.
And Catholic school, going to Catholic school, which was very regimented. Yeah. We had no PE. I was not into sports. We didn't have any physical activity. Right. We would go out and stand in line in the schoolyard during, our break.
Wow.
So suddenly to come to Southern California with the sunshine and the volleyball and the swimming and it was quite a shock.
How did you cope with that shock? What was it? Do you remember getting on the plane with mum and dad and the family and going, okay, this is something that we've got to...
Well, we drove. Wow. We actually drove across the country because we needed to bring our car. Yeah. No, it was absolutely thrilling. Are you kidding? It was an incredible adventure. And I was really excited about it, But then when I got into it was the second half of seventh grade. So I was going into a new public school. We call it public. I think you call it private, but a non-religious school for the first time. It was weird because it was 1965, 64. I think it was 65. So I was 13. And the Beatles, of course, were all the rage. And because I had a very odd Philadelphia East Coast accent, the kids at first thought I was British for some reason. Oh. And they referred to me as the English boy, which I did not dissuade them from thinking because it made them kind of warm up to me and kind of like me. But pretty quickly after that, because I was so incredibly shy, incredibly timid, and gangly and probably effeminate, I was just this cowering little fellow. I quickly became the guy that everybody picked on, and that lasted through my sophomore year of high school when I got into the drama department. and then was accepted and got to blossom,
Right.
and that was wonderful. But to answer your question as to how I dealt with
Yep.
the change, and also how I dealt with not quite fitting in and being bullied, was I retreated into my music even more deeply.
You started writing music
but
very early on,
sadly,
didn't you? I mean, you
well, around then,
Yeah.
it was right around, it was actually a little later than that. But sadly, I'd had a piano since I was a little
Yeah.
kid, because I started playing piano when I was 1,
Wow.
because my grandmother would babysit me and she had a piano, and I just started playing it, taught myself how to play as a baby. I think it's carried over from the past life. But I believe in that stuff. But anyway, so when we moved to California, we could not afford to bring my gigantic upright piano,
No.
which weighed 1,000, pounds, or probably 2. So I was with when I needed the sort of comfort zone of a piano the most, I didn't have one. So my mom won a guitar in a poetry contest, bless her heart, and gave it to me. And so I taught myself how to play guitar. And many of the earliest songs, as you may have
Yes.
heard on my Patreon page,
which we will add a link to, listeners, because John's Patreon page, I got to say, John, and not only your preparation for the interview, but as a unashamed fan of yours, that is a goldmine, folk. If you love musical theatre or cabaret or songwriting, and the stories you have on that page, we will definitely send a link across on the show notes. That has been brilliant, because you've got recordings, and I know we're jumping, but you've got some of the earliest recordings of some of these incredibly well-known songs that you've just basically started playing on the piano with.
Right. Yeah. It's been really fun we're swerving into Patreon for just a moment. What Patreon is, for those of your listeners who have never heard of it, it's a site where artists, and I found it first where Jacob Collier started he started on Patreon as well, an extraordinary musician. And you get a page, it's free to the artist. You set up your page, you can put videos and, little notes and comments and photos. And I've got whole concert videos and whole, videos of full musicals and all kinds of stuff on there. And people subscribe to it. So it's an opportunity for folks to support the artist in however large a financial way they would like to. And all you have to do, at least on my page, it's like a minimum of like $1 a month. And you give them a credit card, and it's billed to your credit. You can stop anytime you want. But for $1 a month, you have access to everything that I put up on the page, which is only for Patreon members. And the reason I started doing it is because the Library of Congress here in Washington agreed to accept my musical archives, which was an incredible honor.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
And it was. And coincidentally, it was just at the beginning of COVID. And so I was sort of trapped here, and of course, looking after my mom. So I wanted to be here. And it provided the perfect project, the perfect COVID project for me to organize close to 500 songs. And, all kinds of, and then piano stuff and improvisations and all kinds of, it's like 50 years of work, 55 years of work. So I did that. And what struck me, besides the amount of material overall, was the amount of material that no one had ever heard.
Yeah.
And it made me kind of sad, as you can imagine. It was like, well, gosh, these are really good. These are good songs, and nobody knows them. And, they know sort of the tip of the creative iceberg, but they don't know.
Yeah.
So Patreon provided a wonderful outlet, and I've put stuff on there in chronological order from the earliest to, I think I'm up to 1998 now. putting things up. I'm going to have to slow down because eventually I'm going to run out of new stuff to put up
Have
there.
to write some more music.
But
it is great stuff. You've got some wonderful stories in there too, which I will let people go and subscribe to. But
yeah, so so for anybody listening and not looking at this, it is to find it. It is Patreon, patreon.com/John Bucchino, Bucchino. And you will find my things, and you can, subscribe if you care to.
And we will definitely put a link up in the show notes. You so the songwriting, and it is great, and I appreciate the fact that you're not only putting so much stuff up there, but for me, when I was doing my research about you and trying to understand where some of these songs came about, you've got pardon me, some of your CDs and your albums. And I'm like, okay, I didn't realize that some of those songs, we're digressing a little bit, but some of those songs were written over, the space of 30 years, and yet you listen to them sequentially. And for me, for example, the Grateful album, which I, adore, it's almost like listening to them. I've actually had to kind of divorce myself as a listener from going, okay, they're not, just because they're being served one up after another doesn't mean that they're written one after another. And for me, that was really important understanding, because of what you've put on some of your comments on Patreon, for example, the context in which some of these songs were written, and at the time of your life where some of these songs were written. And there's everything from the, and we could talk about it a little bit later, but for me, that was a really interesting insight, not only to your life, which is, I think, as someone interested in your music and respectful of your music, really insightful, but as a listener going, that's what he was thinking then, or that's this period of life he was going through then, as opposed to here is the music and you listen to it. So tell me about your songwriting. You're that gangly teenage boy from South Philly. It must have been another world with Palm Springs. You've taught yourself to play piano from a very young age. With your grandmother, but you've never been able, which is fantastic. You've never, you don't read music. So how does that work when you're doing a review? And we'll put up the link to the Launceston. Is it the Jazz Festival in a couple of weeks?
It's an Australian musical theatre festival, and our performance is opening the festival on May 15th, and tickets are available now if anybody would like to come to what I hear is a beautiful city.
It's a great city, Launceston. Yep.
And they're going to be extraordinary performers. In fact, a guest, we have a special guest. I don't know. I hope this isn't a secret, but a dear friend of mine. Do you know Kane Alexander?
Ah, right. Well, yes, he's a very well-known musical theatre performer.
Yeah, well, he's a dear friend, and I haven't seen him in years. Right. And when I'm going to be in Melbourne for a week rehearsing with some of the singers there, which is where Kane lives, but he won't be there. He's going to be out of the country while I'm in Melbourne. So he said, well, I really want to see you. He said, I'm going to come to Launceston. And I said, well, if you're going to come, would you like to maybe sing a song? So he's singing a song.
That's great.
He's a special
wonderful.
guest,
And I will definitely put a link to that production, that festival. So you're so let's go back to the very good question.
Let me tell you, about why I started to write, and the basic sort of impetus to write, where that came from. I was hanging out my circle of friends because I learned to play the guitar. My circle of friends were largely guitar players, other musicians, hippies, whatever. We smoked a lot of pot, whatever. It was the 70s. So it was actually the late 60s, and all of my friends, because we were so inspired by the pop music at the time, which is still at the root of everything that I do. It's been colored by other things that I've heard, and experienced. But basically, my biggest inspirations were always the Beatles and Carole King and James Taylor and Simon and Garfunkel, Paul Simon. Joni Mitchell, those sort of seminal figures in 60s and 70s music. So my friends started writing little songs, and I thought, well, okay, then if that's what we're going to do, I'll do it too. And so I did. And I started writing when I was the earliest song on my Patreon page, and the earliest one that I could find was from 1969 when I was 17. And and amazingly and fortuitously, it's been so helpful. From that very first song, I started typing up on a typewriter. Again, this was the dark ages. Back in the day, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I had I would type up the lyrics and put them in a giant binder. And every time I would write a song, when it was completed, I would type up the lyric and put it in the binder. And, after the last song that I wrote, so if you look at the binder, it would be the earliest one, first, and you could go through what I had done. I still have that binder. I retyped the songs on computer, but anyway, I've got that, which provide, and the other thing that I wanted and I got for high school graduation, which was the dream of my life. And I actually got it a year before I graduated because I wanted it so desperately. I couldn't wait till my graduation. Yeah. And that was a tape recorder. Now, prior to that, I'd had a little cassette recorder, which I could, just record, just sing them and play them just to remember them. But this was what was called a sound on sound, reel to reel, Sony sound on sound, reel to reel tape recorder, which enabled me to do a very rudimentary form of multi-tracking. But you had to play whatever you wanted loudest, which was obviously the vocal. You had to do last, because there was no volume control between the tracks that you had to. The only volume control you had in terms of where each thing was, in terms of prominence and sound, was the order in which you recorded them. So I would record, a piano track, or I had an electric piano track. And then I would go back and you would have to switch a bunch of knobs. And then you could listen to what you recorded and play like a guitar track or whatever. So it was my favorite thing to do in life. And I had not sung. I was very timid about it. So I remember I would sit in my clothes closet behind the clothes and sing very quietly so that nobody would hear me, tragically not very good singing through these songs, but they're included. And you may have heard some of them. And
the first studio recording, so to speak.
Yeah, well, studio in my bedroom and my closet. But the other really cool thing is, not only do I have that lyric notebook, which now has hundreds and hundreds of lyrics in it, I had to keep getting bigger and bigger, notebooks, but I kept all of these recordings.
Wow.
So, and they were all on reel-to-reel tapes. And one of the things that I had to do when I left New York to move here to Tucson, I had this enormous book case with just dozens of these reel-to-reel tapes with songs from my entire life, and a tape recorder on which I could play them that was breaking down. It wasn't going to last much longer. And so thank goodness, I digitized all of those recordings. I played them, and they were disintegrating as the tape was. The tape was like 30, 35 years, 40 years, 50 years old. And playing it, it was snowing from the particles of tape. So I got one pass from that onto a disc player, that recorded it onto a CD. And luckily I captured it all. It was an enormous task. But what I was going to say about the writing what I wrote, while especially at the beginning, it was so strongly influenced by what was on the radio, it was never quite what was on the radio.
No.
It was just me, and I wrote about my inner emotional life, which as, a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old boy was tortured, of course.
Yes.
And I'm, as a gay 17-year-old boy at the time, it was even more tortured because I didn't know what to do with that at all. So one of the things that I did, and is largely carried through, except for the theatrical songs, is I did not use pronouns. He and she. And the love songs are not specifically addressed to her. The earliest ones have some of that, but largely I did not use. There were not pronouns.
That's right.
So it enabled me to be more, closeted, but it also beneficially makes the songs more universal, a lot of them, because it's more second person. It's about you, and the you could be male or female. Right. And the other bonus was I never connected, and I hoped to. My dream was to get a record contract and to be a sort of a confessional singer-songwriter like Joni Mitchell or Elton John or Billy Joel later on, or Carole King or James Taylor. I wanted to be that. And I never really wanted to perform, and certainly didn't want anybody else to perform my songs. I wanted to do it. I wanted to go into a studio and have great musicians and create the sounds that I heard in my head in album form. And that did not happen. So I just pursued my own creative path, which meant that the songs again, a bonus, because the songs don't necessarily sound tied to that time.
No, they're timeless. And I think that's something that Grateful is what, right? How many years old? No, yeah. It's Grateful. But
Grateful is from 1995.
And Taking the Wheel, which again, as I said before we came on, was the first.
I don't even know when that's
something,
from.
I think you've written somewhere. And it
probably, or the 80s, but you wouldn't know it.
That could have been written last week.
Because it's just me. It's just my style. And they're not pop songs. They're not, whatever. They're just me. And it's so sweet in retrospect to realize that the thing that was constantly disappointing to me, that I didn't have songs on the radio and get a record deal and, conquer the pop world or anything like that, is the very thing that helped my career have greater longevity.
Yeah. Is that timelessness of the music?
I guess it's the sort of songwriting equivalent of the guy that's the captain of the football team in high school and totally peaks, and then it's downhill from there. If I had achieved, been a one-hit wonder or had pop music success when I was 21 or 18 or something like that, I don't think I would have had the trajectory.
No.
And I certainly would not have had the amazing experiences along the way that I've gotten to have and met. I wouldn't have met the people that I've gotten to know and befriend. So I feel very fortunate.
Well, dare I say, pun intended, quite grateful.
Quite grateful.
Which is a lovely song. I mean, I love your music.
Thank you.
But you did get your first record deal. So I've got a double question for you. What was it like? There's that story. Yeah. Now, this is a classic, great story. But what was it like? I'm going to turn this around. What was it like to actually hear your song on the radio? But then how did the record deal come about? Because this is a brilliant story.
Oh, it blew my mind. Well, just the psychic
part is a wonderful part of the story, John.
The psychic part. Yeah.
Set the scene up. You're in Hollywood.
I was
in LA.
I was in a play. I had moved when I graduated college in 1974. I moved up to Los Angeles to pursue of course, a recording career was my dream. I wanted, again, a record deal, and I wanted to start cranking out those hits with the support of a record label. So I went up and I made a demo tape, which I just thought was the best thing ever. And I had some help playing it for various, not as extremely well connected, but people that could have helped. And they all basically yawned and turned away and were not remotely interested in what I was doing. Because it was idiosyncratic. It was, my weird little songs, and it didn't sound like what was on the radio. Well, fast forward, I was living in Santa Monica. First, I moved to Venice, California. Then I moved to Santa Monica, California. But those beach cities is pretty much where I lived in LA, which was a great time because in this 70s in Venice, roller skating, disco music was starting, and it was all happening, and it was a great era. And remarkably, I used to make a living either waiting tables, which I did for many years, even when I moved to New York. That was a sort of stable income, or playing piano in piano bars. So this particular time, which would have been 1979, I believe, I was playing piano in a gay piano bar and restaurant called The Academy, which was on Hollywood Boulevard. And a man came in, an older gentleman, who came up to talk to me when I was on a break and said that he was a psychic. And I was like, yeah, okay, right. Sure. And he said, sure. And he said, I'm a psychic and you're really good. And I'm going to get you a record deal. And, he was a little creepy. And I was like, yeah, buddy. And what do you want in return? Yeah. And it just felt a little icky. Yeah. I mean, it's perfectly nice, right. But there was, it's like somebody says I'm a psychic. It's like, and I'm going to get you a record deal. Yeah. Well, sure. He would come in periodically and reiterate that and say, I'm going to get you a record deal. So 1980, I was with a partner, and he and I, mostly I, but he wanted to go too, decided to move to New York City. Right. To pursue the business there, because LA, nothing was happening for me. And a friend was driving across country, this woman friend of ours, and she said, I'll give you a ride and you can stay with me. She had a farm in upstate New York until you get jobs and get settled in New York. And so it was an adventure. So we did that. Well, the week before we were to leave, I went to the dentist. I had 2 wisdom teeth, or 2 weeks before maybe, 2 wisdom teeth pulled, which the doctor was not my regular dentist. He was actually named, believe it or not, Dr. Needle, which should have tipped me off. But he did not give me any care instructions as to how to keep these sockets where he yanked the wisdom teeth from getting infected. Oh, no. So they got infected and swelled out like a chipmunk. I could barely speak. It was terrible. No. And we were going, and excruciatingly painful. Eventually, of course, he got me on antibiotics, but it was still really swollen and not good. Okay, so we're at the going away party our friends were giving the night before we were going to start our drive to New York. And I get a phone call from the psychic saying, there's a guy at my apartment who is starting a record company, and I told him about you, and he wants to hear your songs. This is the record deal I was telling you about. Come over here right now and play songs for this record guy. And I said, but I could barely talk. I've got infected teeth, and we're having a going away party, and I'm moving to New York tomorrow, and I can't. And he was like, I don't care. If you have to come over, and he's gonna sign you, and you're gonna get a record deal. And it was just too tempting. So I drove from Santa Monica all the way into Hollywood, went to this guy's apartment thinking, is he like an axe murderer? Is he going to kill me? Whatever. And there was a guy there who was starting a new record label. And I managed somehow to play and sing. I was probably terrible. sing through a few songs. And the guy said, I love what you do. I think you're really talented. I want to sign you. And I said, but I'm moving to New York tomorrow. He said, that's okay. We'll fly you back.
What?
Which seemed terribly glamorous to me to
Wow.
be flown anywhere.
Absolutely.
We'll fly you back and we'll record some singles and see how it goes.
And you did.
So that's how the record deal, and I did. They didn't go very far. The singles, are enormously produced, and I think they're really cool. But again, the pop radio did not really like them. I did hear one of them, though. Finally, we'd get to the answer to your question about what it felt like on the radio. I did finally hear one of them. I was visiting Palm Springs because my parents still lived in that area, and I had driven from LA down to the Palm Springs area. And as I was driving around in my old Turf, one of them came on the radio.
Wow.
And it was thrilling, of course, surreal to be, especially where I was, I just started writing, and here it's coming on the radio. And I wish that somebody had been with me to hear it, to share it with. But it was pretty darn cool. That is, well, it's not the only time I've heard them on the radio, but on like a pop radio station, it's the only time.
The gentleman who gave you your record deal, according to the research, was a guy called Jimmy Haskell. What happened to him?
Yeah. He was. Well, he's since passed away, but he was evidently a legend. He in terms of an orchestrator, he worked with Frank Sinatra, and he just worked with all these huge people. He wrote the string part for Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Wow.
He did that string arrangement. Yeah, and several other very, very famous songs. And he did the arrangements, of course, for my songs, which were fabulous. We had Frank Sinatra's string section. We had a guitar player named Lee Rittenauer, who's like this legendary electric guitar player. Because Jimmy worked with the best musicians in Hollywood, and so he got them to play on my. So
do you remember day one of going into the studio? And did you kind of stop yourself before you walked into the booth and pinch yourself and go, "Here we are"? Did you just stop for half a second before you walked in? Tell me that experience, because that would have been such a seminal moment for you.
Well, it's hard to remember, but I did feel, thanks to Jimmy's warmth and support, he was a very kind, gentle man who was really the first person of any stature in the business that really believed in me. And I felt so sort of nurtured by him and so comfortable with him that the fact that he was guiding the sessions, I don't think I was that nervous. I was excited, of course, and feeling like, okay, this is it. This is my rocket to fame and fortune. And these songs are going to be, huge hits. I'm going to make a ton of money and be, famous. Which did.
Well, you're famous now.
Did not occur.
You're a slow burn, John. But
I don't.
And I say that respectfully.
I'm famous in limited, circles, and that's fine.
There are two of us on this recording. One of us has a Wikipedia entry, so I'll let listeners work out it's not me. So that would have been incredible for you. You were saying to me, and obviously in the research, and I've realised some of your songs have been written over a long period of time, isn't it? So your creative process, to come back to your very good point before, is not necessarily sit, write, record. It's sit, tinker, come back. And I was reflecting in before that Stephen Schwartz, who you've obviously gone on to work with, he wrote Pippin. Corner of the Sky from driving, as I recall, from Washington DC back to New York. That was the aha moment song for that show.
I didn't know that.
Is that normal for someone to be able to just?
Well, it's not quite accurate, actually.
Right.
Like at the beginning, when I started writing songs, and when I got that treasured Sony sound on sound tape recorder, that was my process.
Right.
I wasn't writing to make an album.
No.
I wasn't like, well, I have to have 16 songs by, the end of the year. But I was writing a steady. It was much more prolific than I've ever been since. Just churning out, teenage angst is wonderful.
It's a deep well, was it, John?
It was a deep well, and especially tortured, closeted teenage angst, I guess is the right pronunciation. So I would write a song and immediately record it as I imagined it, and I did that really. I still do that. It's just that nobody else is usually interested when I first write them. And that brings up the topic of other people singing my songs, which I never wanted, because I had a very specific idea of the exact melody, of vocal rhythms, and the way the vocal part connects to the accompaniment part. And so I wanted to do it. I was just, it was about control of the sound of my own work. Right. And I wanted to be the artist. Now, unfortunately, I was not a great singer. I was an okay singer. I mean, I think good enough for the pop world if they had embraced me. But it wasn't a dazzling voice. I think if I had had a really good voice, that would have helped the songs get across, and maybe I, would have had a pop career. But I never wanted anybody else to sing my songs. And then I started meeting other singers in LA and performing in cabaret situations and coffee houses in LA. And other people wanted to sing, friends of mine wanted to sing my songs. And so I would have them come on as special guests, and they would learn the song by me, sending them a demo or giving them a demo. They would listen to it, and then we would work together very closely. And I would sort of crack the whip and make sure that they sang it exactly the way I wanted them to do it, which they probably hated. And that's how it started. And then when I did move to New York in 1980, I started performing in cabarets in New York, which were much more sophisticated than those, and much more plentiful at the time than those in Los Angeles. And then New York singers started to say, well, we'd like to, other people wanted to wanted to perform my songs. So I would work with them and teach them the song, but there wasn't a piano part. So they could only sing them if I happened to be in New York and could accompany them, because I didn't read or write music and nothing was on paper, which is the other reason that I didn't want anybody else to sing it or play it. Because since it wasn't notated, of course, it wouldn't be accurate. And that was like a knife in my heart. I couldn't bear that. So it wasn't until I moved to New York and the technology, thank goodness, became available. And I met an extraordinary Brazilian musician who was also a tech wizard named Mario Vaz de Mello. Also a composer himself, an electronic composer, through an amazing series of coincidences, who helped me because I had gotten the record deal to record the Grateful album, and I had signed prior to that a publishing deal with the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization. All of this because I'd been in New York for a few years, and people were starting to know my work. And so the Rodgers and Hammerstein folks said, well, if you're going to do an album, we would like to put out a songbook of the songs that to match the album, which seemed like a great marketing tool. So that if people liked the album and wanted to perform the songs. But then it was like, well, how do I get them onto paper? And that's where my beloved friend Mario came in. And we devised a system where I would play the song into two electric keyboards, the left hand on a lower keyboard and the right hand on a separate upper keyboard, which was a little unwieldy. I had to get used to it. But the reason for that was those they would be then separate tracks. The left hand and the right hand would be on separate tracks. And when you transfer them into the print form, the computer would know exactly what the left hand was doing and what the right hand was doing, and could put them on the appropriate stage.
Yes.
Because if you just play on one keyboard, how would the computer differentiate what you were doing with your left and what you were doing with your right? So I did that, and then I would overdub the vocal melody, and that would be a separate track and a separate line. And then Mario would get it onto the page. The computer could play it back to me. So even though I couldn't read it, I could hear it and know if there was a wrong note, or if there was something that didn't feel right, and we would correct it. And that's the way my music has been. Everything, almost everything that's on paper was done that way.
Wow.
Hours and hours and hours of sitting in Mario's little Lower East Side apartment, ordering takeout food and working for hours. And at the time, actually for 23 years in Manhattan, I played piano up until I left. So from 1994 until 2017, 5 days a week, 2 hours a day, I played piano in office building lobbies, which a friend of mine had gotten this gig. It was a big company that owned lots of big office buildings, and they had Steinway pianos in their lobbies, and that was sort of their corporate trademark that they would have at lunchtime, piano music.
Beautiful.
And my friend who was doing it was increasingly sick. He had AIDS. And so he asked me to sub for him, and eventually he passed away, and I just took over the gig. And it provided exactly enough money to pay my rent.
2 hours a day. Wow. Rain, hail, or snow, you were going from.
Yeah.
And was it the same building every day, or was it a different building, or was it?
No. It was 1 week, and there were 7 buildings, I think. And it was like 1 week in each building, and we rotated. There were 7 pianists and some subs. If you needed a sub, you could always find one. And if I did it all month, it paid enough to get me pay at least the rent, and then I had to scramble around to make other money to pay the other bills.
When you were moving from Santa Monica to New York City back in the day,
the first time or the second time? In 1980 or in 1992?
1992. So let's just go back, because that's when you had found what you described in an interview that we'll put the link in 2009 interview, which I'm grateful for you sending across. You found part of a song that ended up being your favorite piece of music.
Oh, I did. Yeah. Well, first of all, we should talk about why I decided to move. From Los Angeles, from Santa Monica to New York. And that involves my dear, dear, beloved friend, Mr. Stephen Schwartz.
People may have heard of that gentleman.
You might have heard of that gentleman.
Now, some guy called Steve or Stephen, but we'll come to that.
I call him Stephen, and I call Sondheim Steve. So to differentiate. But anyway, I left out a whole big career chapter, which started in 1984. And I was waiting tables, but I ended up being a pianist for a very well-known women's music artist, women's music and political artist named Holly Near, Near. And she's amazing, powerful, glorious voice, brilliant songwriter, sings about really important things in a spectacular way. And I was lucky enough to become her accompanist and to travel the world with her. And also she was working with an older woman named Ronnie Gilbert, who had been the voice of a 50s group called the Weavers, with Pete Seeger and Lee Hayes and Fred Hellerman. It was 4 of them. And Ronnie was the female voice of that very popular 50s folk group, best known for their hit Goodnight Irene, which Ronnie was the lead singer on. So Holly had brought Ronnie out of retirement because she admired her politics and her work with the Weavers. And they were performing both separately and doing concerts together. And so I became the accompanist for both of them.
Wow.
So, and that lasted. I did some shows with Holly last year. At 36, 37, however many years, 40 years later, whatever it was, 38 years later.
Impressive.
So we still, we sporadically have continued to work together. But Ronnie, Holly lived on the West Coast. Ronnie lived in New York. And Ronnie was also the first person to record one of my songs. She recorded a song called In a Restaurant by the Sea, which is also on my Grateful album.
Lovely song.
She liked the song and she recorded that on her first solo album. So Ronnie was doing a benefit, a juvenile diabetes benefit, and also on the bill was a certain Mr. Stephen Schwartz. And Ronnie was only doing, I think, 3 songs. And so she couldn't afford to fly me from the West Coast to accompany her on, 3 songs. And they weren't paying. It was a benefit. So she asked if Stephen, who's an extraordinary pianist, of course, might also do his set, but also accompany her on her songs. And because Stephen grew up listening to the Weavers and was a huge fan of Ronnie's, he was thrilled and said, of course, I'd be delighted to accompany you on your material. Well, one of her songs was my song, In a Restaurant by the Sea, for which, of course, at the time, there was no sheet music. So Stephen had to learn it from a tape.
What, by ear?
From her album. He had to learn it by ear, listening to the recording that she and I had done of it. And he did. I've never heard him play it, but he evidently learned
Apparently
it.
he did play it.
And I think he did. And so then he said to Ronnie, I really love this song. Who wrote this song? And she said, oh, that was written by my regular pianist, a guy named John Bucchino, who lives in L.A. And he asked if she had any more of my work. And she had one of these cassettes that I would give out to anybody who would take one that had like 25 songs of mine on it, because I was so desperate, I guess, or eager is a healthier word maybe, to get my work out into the world. So I always carried cassettes and gave them out to anybody who might be interested. So Ronnie had one of those and she gave it to Stephen. And Stephen has told this story. He told it to me and he's told it many times, where he put the cassette in his car system when he was driving back up to Connecticut, where he lives, from the city after the benefit. And he says he had to pull over and just stop and listen to the whole cassette. Wow. Because he just, liked it that much. And very shortly thereafter, I got a call from him saying, that he didn't know if he could do anything to help me, but he was like my biggest fan. He loved my work and that he was going to be in LA and might we get together? And nobody at that point was expressing really any interest in my songs. And here was this big famous Broadway guy. And I did not know Broadway stuff. I'd heard Corner of the Sky and Day by Day because they were on the radio. But other than that, I'd never seen any of his shows. I didn't know, anything about theater writing. But I was like, yeah, of course. And he was staying at the home of a pop songwriter named Dean Pitchford, who wrote the lyrics to Footloose and a couple of Whitney Houston hits. And him, I knew. And I was more excited that I was going to be meeting this guy at Dean Pitchford's house.
You're going to Dean's house. You didn't.
Then the fact that Dean's house, the fact that it was Stephen Schwartz, I was like, yeah, whatever.
Pippin,
Well, yeah, but I mean, I knew he was famous, but I had no experience with his work. So we met, we sat around Dean's piano. Sadly, I was so disappointed Dean was not there, but we sat around Dean's piano and played songs for each other, took turns playing songs for each other all afternoon. And I thought, he's very good. This Stephen Schwartz guy is really good.
He's not bad.
and he's not bad. And evidently he thought the same. And we just became best friends. And whenever he would come to LA, we would have sushi together. That was our thing. We would always go have sushi. And between those times when we were in the same city, I would send him demos of new songs. He would send me things he was working on. And I felt like, I have a best friend who does what I do, who really gets it. And after, I had never had that before. And it was just wonderful. It was so uplifting and encouraging. And he was encouraging. And because I admired what he did so much, the fact that he liked what I did was really uplifting. And like I said, it made me feel really good. And so from the very beginning, he went to work on me, trying to nudge me into writing for theater, which I had never been interested in.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, did you grow up with what was the music that was playing in your house in South Philly or Palm Springs? Was there, right. Obviously the Beatles?
It was, but earlier than that, in fact, even in the womb, I was listening to Rodgers and Hammerstein Carousel. My mom and dad had gone to see the original production of the show when it came through Philly, or the original tour of the show when it came through Philly. And my dad bought my mom the little box set of 45 records, and she played it constantly before I was even born. And when I was born, it saturated my awareness, but also the like songs on the radio, which was like Perry Como, and it was pre rock and roll, pre pop. There might have been some Elvis Presley in there, but there was always music. And I remember that my dad, they quickly, because of my piano playing, knew that I loved music. And every Friday, if I was a good boy that week, my dad would bring home a 45 record for me, a new one. And so it was like Paul Anka and maybe the Everly Brothers, and, whatever was pop music at the time. But not theater, other than a carousel. Okay. Well, then eventually there were movies made of musical theater. Right. So, Mary Poppins, of course, we listened to those songs. I listened to those songs. The Sound of Music was huge, of course, and I loved that music, but I never thought I could write for theater or aspire to. I wanted to be a pop, singer-songwriter. But Stephen Schwartz, that rascal, started trying to nudge me in the direction. He said, you might want to consider moving to New York and writing for musical theater, because you have an inherently theatrical element in what you naturally do that I think would work really well in music theater. And I was not opposed to the idea. I just didn't love it. Right. I don't know. But then again, it was a door that might be creaking open. And here was, one of the biggest names in musical theater saying, I think you'd be good at this. So I took it seriously. And then, because Stephen Schwartz, whenever I would be in New York, he would invite me to go to this musical theater panel. I believe it was the Dramatists Guild. And they would have panels where musical theater writers would bring in like 45 minutes of something on which they were working. And this illustrious panel of musical theater, like, Sheldon Harnick, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof, and people just like really a big Charles Strauss, who wrote Annie, really big, Stephen Sondheim, the pantheon of musical theater, who were all members of the Dramatists Guild, would participate in critiquing new work that young, writers were bringing in. So Stephen would always bring me to those. to try to just sort of get me interested and to have more awareness of what musical theater was. And I saw everybody kind of worshiping at the feet of Stephen Sondheim. So I thought, well, he's the big cheese. He's the guy that everybody admires. So of course, I want him to hear my songs. So the next time I went, I brought a cassette of the 25 songs, complete with lyric sheets in a manila envelope, and he wasn't there. So I left it with the secretary, and in it was also a note, because for 5 consecutive Mondays and Tuesdays, I was doing a cabaret show with a dear friend that I had met in New York, a woman named Lois Sage, who sings temporary on the Grateful,
album, which is beautiful.
CD. One of the most glorious voices you have ever heard in your life, and she still sings like an angel.
Wow.
And she and I were going to put a cabaret show together with a kind of loose thematic, like a bit of a plot about a couple, whatever. And Stephen Schwartz agreed to direct it and help us to shape it. So after I dropped off that tape for Sondheim, we were already on our first or second week of performances. I think we had 3 more weeks of Mondays and Tuesday performances to go. And I was staying with a friend, and her daughter, I heard her say something about Stephen, and I, on the phone, and I assumed it was Stephen Schwartz calling for me, but it wasn't. It was Steve Sondheim calling for me. He had been given the cassette and had done exactly what Stephen Schwartz had done, had put it in his car system on his way, driving back to his home in Connecticut, and called me the minute he got into his house and was just gushing and said, we've got to talk. And I said, well, do you want to come? And I said, do you want to come to, one of the performances? I'd love to meet you. And he said, actually, there was only one performance left. That's right. By the time I finally heard from him, I think it was like the Thursday before or the Friday before the final Monday and Tuesday. And I said, would you like to come to the performance? And he said, no, I'm busy writing. He was writing Assassins at the time. And he said, normally when I'm writing, I don't listen to anything else. He said, but I happened to put your cassette in. And he said, then as soon as I got in the house, I played the whole thing again. He said, because I remember the adjectives. He said, because when there's something as rich, lush, and intense as you're writing, you want to hear it again and again and again. And I was like, yeah, okay, Steve Sondheim.
You're doing the marketing for me, Steve Sondheim. That's great. Thanks so much. You're writing the album cover.
And he was like, well, I can't come to your show, but here's my number, my assistant's number. Give him a call next time you're going to be in the city and come over and we'll get together. Wow. And that's what I did. And we spent a few hours together. And he was really much more adamant than Stephen Schwartz had been about me writing for theater. You have to move here. You should be writing for theater. What are you thinking? Do it. And I said, well, I don't even, read or write music. And he said, well, you've got to get everything on paper. And he said, it was really funny. He said, they're going to fuck it up anyway.
Which goes back to your point before about you wanting to be
right. He said they're still going to,
we won't take that
screw it up, but at least have your intention notated so that at least, it'll be closer to what you want. And that began a long friendship with him. And that was, I met Stephen Schwartz in 1987. I met Sondheim in 1989. And in 1992, I moved to New York. And that's what started it.
That's amazing. That is amazing, which goes back to the question before of your favorite song. So you're packing up from Santa Monica to go back to New York.
Oh yeah. And I was putting a lyric.
Song.
I remember I was sitting under not under, but at the foot, on the carpet near my piano, going through lots of lyric books and packing them. And, I happened to be thumbing through one of them, and I saw a lyric to a song called Unexpressed, which I vaguely recall that when I wrote it, I thought, oh, well, that's not very good. And I seem to remember thinking that it sounded like a James Taylor song somehow. I can't even imagine which one it was, that it was somehow derivative and I was stealing from James Taylor and whatever. And I just put it aside and, but looking at the lyric, I thought, how did this go again? Because I liked the lyric. I was like, oh, and luckily, thank God, I remembered it. And, I played it and I was like, I don't know why I didn't like this. This is really kind of good. and so over the next, months or whatever it was, after the move to New York and stuff, I kind of became obsessed with it. And now it is indeed my favorite song that I've ever written.
That's beautiful. It is a gorgeous song.
Almost. Thank you. Have you heard Patti LuPone's
version?
Yes.
Now it's on one of your. Hang on, which one's on? Oh, I've got all of yours.
No, she's not. She's not. She sings dancing. She sings dancing on the radio. But she put it and two other songs of mine on one of her albums. And people, your listeners, can find a video of her, a YouTube video of her singing Unexpressed with John Williams conducting the Boston Pops. Oh, but wait, there's more. In a duet with cellist Yo-Yo Ma.
Right, okay. Let's just have a musical moment.
You could die. Just die. It's the most amazing thing. And she didn't tell me that she was going to be doing it. She didn't let me know. And so I'm flying. I was doing a concert with Holly Near in Pittsburgh, I recall. And I was at the airport going to the concert in Pittsburgh. And I had an answering machine, as we did in those days. And I happened to call home on a pay phone from the airport and listen to my messages. And there was a message from Patti saying, "Hi, doll. You'll never guess what I did last night. I sang your song Unexpressed with John Williams conducting the Boston Pops in a duet with Yo-Yo Ma." And she said, and James Taylor, here's irony. She said, and James Taylor was there and he came backstage and said, "What a beautiful song. Who wrote that song?" Okay, well, got to go by. Right. And I was like, what the heck?
You started doing laps in the airport. I mean, that would have been an incredible moment.
I didn't. I was more angry than I was excited. So I called her on her cell phone. And luckily I reached her and I said, did it not cross your mind that I might want to know about that? And that I might want to go to the performance of you doing that? Right. And she was like, and she said, "Oh, well, gosh, I'm sorry." She said, "We're doing it again Monday night, and they're filming it for PBS. Would you like to come?" Yes. No. So I changed my flight from Pittsburgh to New York to go from Pittsburgh to Boston, where the concert was, and I actually got to attend. Thank goodness.
I'm going to find that YouTube clip and we'll put it in the show notes. That's
I
didn't know that about you. That's a brilliant story.
Yo-Yo Ma.
Wow.
Yeah, Yo-Yo Ma's solo, the instrumental and his solo is one of the most gorgeous things I've ever heard in my life. When they played it for me at they were doing a tech camera check, for PBS, and the orchestra wasn't there, but John Williams and Yo-Yo and Patti were there, and Yo-Yo and Patti just did it, just the two of them, without the strings, just as a duet, just for the blocking for the cameras. And I, of course, sat there weeping. And Yo-Yo Ma came over to me afterwards. I was a puddle. I was just a mess. And said, "He's such a dear man." And he said, "Was that all right? Do you want me to change anything?"
Goodness.
He's so humble and gracious. And I was like, "No, just do that. That
was
really good." And by the way, will you be my best friend? I love you.
But a fanboying going on, was there, John?
But I thought that.
Well, I get that.
Oh, please.
Just a bit.
What an angel.
Now, you've had an amazing career. People can look you up if they haven't found your music already. There's a story that is perhaps I'd call it your taking the wheel moment, and it's a song that is on your Patreon page, and again, we'll encourage people to listen to that. You've put a lot of work into this particular song.
I'm very curious.
No, I'm setting this story up for you because the creative process. So you put your heart and your soul into this music, and this song was called "A Reason for Everything." And you've gone and pitched it to
Oh my God! Right? Of all the obscure songs for you to take,
because this story that in the interview that you did way back in 2009. I'll let you tell the story because I guess from someone that loves music and admires your music, I think a lot of people would go, okay, what we get on the album is the finished product, but what we don't recognize, as you've rightly alluded to before, is
that song has never ever been recorded. No. It was just a throwaway. It was something, but I'll tell the story. So, Stephen Schwartz had been writing for DreamWorks. Mm-hmm. He did Prince of Egypt for DreamWorks, and he was telling me about the process. And I thought, oh my God, I could never do that because there's a hierarchy of people all along the way making the movie that you have to please, and they have to accept what you do and they get to criticize what you do and nitpick and tell you what to change. And I hate that. It's like, I'm sorry, I wrote a song. It's done. Yeah. Leave it alone, which is the opposite. And also at the top of the hierarchy of the pyramid, if you will, is Jeffrey Katzenberg, who had formerly been with Disney and was one of the founding members of DreamWorks and head of DreamWorks Animation. A daunting figure. So I thought, and Stephen would tell me stories about, difficulties, whatever. And I thought, well, never in a million years could I do that. Well, be careful what you don't wish for.
The psychic didn't tell you this part,
about a year. No. About a year later, a friend of mine, a woman friend of mine, knew one of the producers in the animation department at DreamWorks. And her friend, this producer, was looking for a songwriter to write songs for a new animated movie that they were going to be doing called Joseph, King of Dreams, which was historically a prequel to Prince of Egypt. And it was the story of Joseph, a.k.a. and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, as Andrew Lloyd Webber did it. But it was the Joseph story. And so my friend Beth gave this woman, her name was Cher Stallings, gave Cher 3 demo tapes of songs. One by me, one by Adam Gettle.
Hang on, we know that name.
Who wrote most famously known for Light in the Piazza and being just one of my very favorites, people and songwriters. And the third by Jason Robert Brown, of whom you also may have heard. So because she's friends with all of us and we're all friends. And so she gave Cher a sample of each of our work. And DreamWorks amazingly chose me.
Wow.
And they asked me to write songs for this. Now, it was to be a direct to video. It wasn't going to be a theatrical release in movie theaters, but still, it was the biggest gig I'd ever had. It was, a huge opportunity that also terrified me because I didn't know if I could rise to the occasion. It was a whole new, world. So, but I said yes and wrote the opening number for the movie. And by the way, this Joseph, King of Dreams animated movie is available on Netflix. People can find it and watch it and stream it. Yeah. And it had quite a few stars. Actually, the singing voice of
this
Joseph
is a good story too.
Is David Campbell.
Your good friend.
The speaking voice my dear friend, the speaking voice of Joseph is Ben Affleck. There's also a story there, but we can't,
which is on Patreon.
We can't go too far afield.
I think you put that story on Patreon. Yes, that's worth the price of admission alone.
Sure. That's pretty good. But anyway, so I wrote the opening number, and amazingly, everybody loved it. It was like there was no problem. Right. Jeffrey Katzenberg, was thrilled. I was like, well, this is going to be a piece of cake. This isn't going to be hard at all. All right, then.
I got this.
So the writers, I've got this. So the writers, I was, talking with people who were writing the story, writing the book for it. And they said, we have the next moment that we need is a moment where his brothers have thrown him into a pit. And he's been enslaved, and he's in Pharaoh's prison, and he's really miserable, and it's the low point of his life. And we've got about 5 pages of exposition. Right. And if you could write a song that encapsulates these 5 pages of dialogue and stuff that's happening, that's setting this up, that would really help us out. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. give it a shot. And that's where A Reason for Everything was the song that I wrote. It was a lengthy, sort of sprawling, recitative kind of, it wasn't a concise, tight little 3-minute song because it had to accomplish so much, expositionally. But I did it, and I made a little, piano vocal demo of it and sent it to them. The writers were over the moon. This is perfect. You solved our problem. God bless you. We love you. Jeffrey Katzenberg is going to be thrilled with this. And so I was flying out to LA to have meetings about other songs that, we're going to need. And at the end of the week on Friday, I was supposed to play this fabulous new song that Jeffrey was going to love for Jeffrey live.
So you've walked in really thinking, I've got this. This is good.
I'm pumped. I'm like, I have got this. And I'd never met Jeffrey. So it was a little scary because he's a scary dude. But I thought, well, if they say he's going to love it, he's going to love it. So it was the end of the week. I, went in to this little, I don't even know, a little like a screening room, but it had a really terrible spinet piano, a little crappy cardboard piano sitting in a corner. And that's what I had to play it on. I was like, all right, whatever. It's such a brilliant song. He'll be able to hear me on it. So, and Jeffrey that day had won a settlement from Disney for $125 million. So you would think that might put Jeffrey Katzenberg in a good mood.
You would think that, John, wouldn't you?
You would think, but not so much. He was in a foul mood. Maybe he wanted $250 million, and he only got $100. I don't know. He was in a foul mood. Stood by the piano. I played the song, thinking, "Okay, this will perk you up. You're gonna love this." He hated it.
Oh no.
And he hated it so much that he couldn't even speak. It's like steam was coming out of his ears. He was sputtering. He was like, but, I mean, he couldn't even find the words to express how much he loathed the song that I played for him. Finally, he said, it's, and I was like, what is he going to say? What's the adjective? It's, and he said, theatrical. Like that was bad. The most damning word he could ever use to describe anything. And he said, no, we need an anthem. We need our spirits lifted. We need to be inspired, and we need to cry and be moved, and it's got to be profound. And he just threw all this stuff at me. And, and I just kind of nodded and,
died quietly,
whatever, sort of bowed and scraped my way out of the room with my friend, by then Cher Stallings, one of the producers, become my sort of confidant and dear friend, and I was working most closely with her. And when I got outside the room, out of Jeffrey's earshot, it was like, he's an idiot. That's Jeffrey Katzenberg. It's a brilliant song. What's wrong with him? Everybody else loved it. And, and I'm going to quit. I don't need this. I don't need this, drama in my life, blah, 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 blah. And she was like literally just patting me on the shoulder saying, okay, breathe, calm down. It's going to be fine. And, what was established was I was not going to quit.
Good.
And I had to come up with another song.
So no pressure.
So I went home and I sat to New York. I sat at my piano and I just kept playing A Reason for Everything over and over and over, going, this is what's wrong with him. You're an idiot, Jeffrey Katzenberg. This is brilliant. And trying to think of, is there any section of this that I can steal, that I can use to create a new song? Because I had no idea what to write. And I was getting more and more desperate and more depressed. And just in ultimately a kind of despair, which fascinatingly was exactly the state that Joseph was in this particular scene in the movie. And so from that place of despair in myself, I wrote a song called Better Than I.
Which is a beautiful
Which is
song.
also on the Grateful album. Thank you. It's my mom. It was my mom's favorite of my songs, and I remember writing it and liking it, and then I had put there's like a cup. It changes key. It goes up a key, and then at the end it goes, and the very last bit it goes up another key. And I was like, wow, is that too like melodramatic? Is that too much? And I remember calling Cher Stallings on the phone and playing it for her and saying, is it too much at the end? When she's like, no, it's great. I think it's going to be really good. And when Jeffrey heard it, and David Campbell actually did, who was living in New York at the time, did the demo of the song to send to DreamWorks to listen to, because I was trying to get David the gig of singing the lead role in the film. Right. And I thought, well, if they hear him singing the song, maybe they'll, and he did a great job. And Jeffrey Katzenberg sent me a fax. Remember faxes? And I still have it. And a fax, yes. And on the fax was the lyric of the song, which I had sent to him, and he had scrawled across it, "Home run."
Oh, wow. The relief of getting that the nervousness of you getting that fax coming through, not knowing what it would have been.
Well, no, because I think Cher had already told me. She had said, "Oh, he loved it."
Wow.
Yeah. So no, I got that. I got that. But also, but having David sing the song ultimately did result. They chose somebody else. They chose somebody singer who lived in Los Angeles to sing the part of Joseph in the movie. And I didn't think he was that good. He certainly wasn't as good as David. But they didn't want to hire David because he was going back to Australia, and they knew they would have to fly him from Australia to LA, and the expense of that. They thought, well, we'll just hire somebody local in LA. But when we looked at the first animation of the song, Better Than I, to which their vocalist had put his vocal on a demo. And so they had matched it to him singing it. I was in a screening room and Jeffrey was sitting behind me. And we watched it, and I heard Jeffrey say to the person next to him, "I like the other guy better," which was David.
Great.
And I was like, yes, my friend got the gig.
That's fantastic. The pressure that you would have been under to having seen that song, A Reason for Everything, which again is on your Patreon page, just torn apart. How?
No, it's not a great song.
It's not a bad song, but it's, it's not.
It's fine.
But you, I guess my point is, you put so much emotional effort into this thing, and you want it to be good, and it would have been. Did times kind of just stop when Jeffrey's sitting there going, "I don't like this, and I don't like that, and I loathe it."
Yes, and I was also spoiled because the only arbiter, the only judge of what I did was me, because I hadn't done it for any external reason where anybody else got to make judgment on it. So this was particularly hard for me. And honestly, that's something about musical theater, which, having dipped my toe into it, it doesn't suit me.
Right.
You know, people like Sondheim, I think he said that he preferred rewriting to writing. He liked the process of tailoring something or throwing it out and writing a new song. I don't, that's not me, you know, and taking input from other people as to how to make it, quote, better. It freaks me out. I don't really enjoy that. I'm not really a musical theater guy. I'm just a songwriter. I just write songs. I write little 3.5-minute vignettes. You know, if I were a painter, I would be a miniaturist. It's just a moment frozen, an emotional moment captured in time in a small form is what I think I'm good at.
And yet there you are, having had a Broadway musical.
How the hell did that happen?
Let's talk about Harvey. I want you to tell me about the Harvey quote.
Kicking and screaming was dragged into writing for, well, because, you know, again, when Stephen Schwartz and Steve Sondheim are saying, write for the theater, you know, and again, nothing much else was really happening for me. It was before the Grateful album. So I had just moved to New York and, of course, was entering into a circle of friends who all wrote for the theater. So I was like, well, all right, I guess I'll give it a shot. And the first thing I wrote was a bite-sized musical, a musical consisting of bite-sized pieces. It was individual, like 10, 15-minute segments, each one of which was based on an urban legend or urban. The show was called Urban Myths.
Right.
Myths, which was like, you know, the myth about the albino alligators living in the sewers of New York, the myth about the woman who washed the poodle and put it in the microwave to dry it, the myth about the woman who teased her hair in the 50s and kept spraying it, never washed it, and spiders got in and ate through to her brain and killed her. These were all things that I and my writing partner, the book writer, musicalized as part of the Urban Myths show. And some songs that people know actually were written, you know, including Temporary. We actually used Grateful in Urban Myths as well. And it was directed. There was one production of Urban Myths in Wichita, Kansas, and it was directed by Mr. Scott Schwartz, who is the son of Stephen Schwartz, whom I've known since he was 12. And he is now a brilliant and sought-after director of theater. And he directed our piece. So anyway, I'd done that. Nothing ever came of it. It never had another production. It just disappeared into the mists of time. And because then the Grateful album happened, and I got a fan letter from Harvey Fierstein, who people may or may not know. He's a very flamboyant actor and writer, a prolific and brilliant writer, who is most known for his gravelly voice. He was in Mrs. Doubtfire, and he played the brother, Robin Williams' brother, who makes him up, and you know, whatever. And he's quite a character, larger than life. And I got a fan letter from him because he'd heard the Grateful CD and liked it, and just wrote me a very nice note, you know, talking about how much he liked it. And that was, you know, that was great. And so based on that, I thought, well, he writes for theater, you know, maybe we should get together and stuff. And so I called him up. He included his phone number in the note. And I called him and said, well, it was such a sweet thing. Can I take you out to dinner? You know, can we get together? And he was like, actually, yeah, I'd love to. We should get together. He said, I have a project that I'm thinking of that I'd like to talk to you about. And the project was based on a teleplay from the 50s by Paddy Chayefsky, which then became a movie written by Gore Vidal called The Catered Affair. Harvey ultimately changed the name to A Catered Affair so that alphabetically it would be closer to the top of the New York Times theater listings.
Clever.
He's a sharp cookie, that Harvey. So we had dinner. He pitched it to me, and I didn't know. I mean, it was like a big commitment, and playing in the big leagues with this guy who had won Tony Awards for, he wrote the book for La Cage aux Folles. He wrote, of course, the Torch Song Trilogy, for which he won a Tony Award. So I was like, am I really ready for this? I'd never written a full-length, book musical. And so I went to Stephen Schwartz and said, do you think this is a good idea? Am I getting it over my head? Can I do this and stuff? And Stephen was, as always, very encouraging. And then I set up a dinner, which Harvey graciously agreed to come to. They live in the same town in Connecticut, so it wasn't that hard. And the three of us had dinner, and Harvey basically pitched the idea to Stephen for me.
Right.
And I was spending the night at Stephen's house in Connecticut. And so after the dinner, we went back to Stephen's and talked about it. And he said, actually, I think this is a really good idea. I think you should do it.
And Harvey wasn't subtle in his pitching to you, was he? He said, listen, Cookie.
Well, no. And so the next day, that's where that happened. The next day I went to Harvey's spectacular Connecticut home where I'd never been, which was just amazing, with the rolling hills and not another house in sight, and the swimming pool and the fountain, the waterfall, and the blah, blah, blah. It was pretty opulent. And I was sitting on his spectacular velvet couch that he had designed, and we were chatting, having a cup of tea or something. And I was still undecided. I was still kind of hemming and hawing about, well, I don't know. It's such a, and he finally cut me short and just said, listen, Cookie, La Cage bought me this house. What are you going to retire on? And I said, I'll do it. I'll do it.
I love that quote. That's a brilliant quote. And thus it happened.
And I did it, not knowing that it would ever go to Broadway, but because of, and it was a really, easy and lovely creative process with Harvey. And I, didn't know how to approach it, but I just wrote the songs. And I don't know that anybody else does this, but I wrote the songs. First of all, he wrote the script like a straight play. He didn't write a script where it said song here or song, whatever. Okay. He just wrote it as a straight through play, all dialogue. And he said, let's each make a list of where we think songs could go. And then we'll get together and compare our lists. So we each made a list. We got together to have dinner, and the lists were virtually identical, which was a very good sign.
Excellent.
About our, creative compatibility. Yeah. And then for about a year, I just took that script, and he was busy because he was doing Fiddler on Broadway, and then he was doing Hairspray on Broadway, and then he was doing Fiddler, and he was busy as an actor, which was great. So, I just had this time alone, and I just went through the script and took the chunk of prose that I wanted to musicalize out of the script and put a song in that accomplished the same thing and said the same thing, that fit the dramatic arc, that little piece of the dramatic arc that prose had fit. And I did that, and I just went through the whole script and just did that and wrote the whole score. And so my idea was to make it sort of seamless and between sort of an extension of what Rodgers and Hammerstein started with Oklahoma was, and the biggest compliment that some people said when they saw the show on Broadway was we didn't even notice when the song started or stopped. It was like they were talking, and all of a sudden they were singing, they were in a song, and then all of a sudden they were talking again. And that was my goal. So I felt good about that.
How much pressure did you feel about putting that together? Like that you've.
The writing of it, I didn't, it was fun. It was really joyful. And the way, Harvey had written a lovely script, and it was just like a homework assignment that I found
enjoyed.
that I enjoyed, and I felt capable. I felt like, oh yeah, I know how to do this. Yeah. And he warned me. He said, now we're going to be bringing other people into the, playground with us. And it's going to get more complicated. And it did.
Did you read the reviews? Sorry, I interrupted you then without being rude. Did you read the reviews?
I did not at the time. Right. They were mixed. Right. But there was one that I did read and still cling to. It was by a very famous critic named Clive Barnes. And I believe it was in I don't know which paper, I forget, the Daily News or the Post. Wasn't the Times, but it was one of the three big New York papers. And he gave the show 4 stars. And the only show that whole season the other show that he gave 4 stars to was the updated version, or the what's it called? I can't think of the word. The new production of South Pacific with Kelly O'Hara at Lincoln Center. He gave that 4 stars, and he gave A Cater Affair 4 stars. So that felt good. But I did not read all the reviews, and I still haven't. But friends want to tell you what the bad reviews say. Right. And I was like, I didn't. I purposely didn't read them. You don't have to tell me all the horrible things they said about me. Please, stop.
How does it work? And you've alluded to this a couple of times. There you are back in California, growing up, and you wanted to be the person who wrote it and performed it. How have you been able over the years to let go of that? And I use the term politely, control freakery. And I'm not saying you're a control freak at all. Yeah, no,
it's true. No, I am. I'll cop to that.
I'm not trying to be rude, but, it must be hard in a way.
It's true.
And the analogy I will give you is...
I have bloody fingernails from my fingers being pried off of certain things that needed to be let go into the world. And it's like, wait, not yet. I'm not ready. So, no, it is enormously hard. But what's been helpful is that there are benefits in letting other people in. If it's a singer that, and I've been so fortunate, of course, to have extraordinary singers that are way better singers than I am, that bring their brilliance and their talent and add it to what I do, to the writing, and express it through their brilliant talent. That's an incredible gift. And it makes it easier to let go when I've heard my songs elevated by extraordinary performances that I didn't control or over control. So it's a learning curve, but I'm much better. And what helps is now the music is written out, so I don't have to worry that they're going to go too far astray.
So let's talk about some of the leadership lessons over time that you've learned, and you've obviously you work with casts, and for example, how do you lead a cast who are all individuals and all very passionate about their craft, and who want to shine in their own right? How do you get them to gel as a cast?
I don't. The director does. I just acquiesce, unless my work is being, adversely affected by something or impacted in a way that.
So you're quite hands off in that creative process when you.
If there's a direct, for instance, let's maybe start talking about the show that will be happening at the Australian Musical Theatre
Fantastic.
Festival, It's Only
Yep.
Life, and how that came about, because that was a big learning curve
Okay.
for me. And it was my dear friend, Daisy Prince, daughter of legendary director-producer Hal
Wow.
Prince, or Harold Prince.
The Hal Prince.
And Daisy and her family, Hal and Judy Prince, became my New York parents.
Ah,
And in some ways, you know, he was certainly the father that I wished I'd had. I loved him dearly, and we became very close, and I would visit them in Florida and spend a week or two, and we would, you know, go on vacations and do things together. And, you know, they really welcomed me into their family. So Daisy appreciated my work, and I had thought about putting together a musical review, because she had not too long before that put together a musical review of Jason Robert Brown's songs called Songs for a New World, which was quite successful. And I was like, well, I have a whole lot of songs. Maybe we could do that. And she was she wanted it. She was excited about it. And I remember, you know, sitting in her living room with the lyric sheets from my lyric book that I had, you know, typed up over the decades, and there were copies of them strewn about, thinking of how we could string the songs together. What could the framework be to, you know, how many actors should there be? You know, and I kept, you know, we would string together like a couple, 2 or 3 songs, and I'd say, oh, I see, it's a story of, and Daisy, in a very Zen way, would say, there is no story.
okay.
You know, because in a review,
So, yeah, it doesn't have
you
to
don't
have
have to, you
a
know,
narrative all the way through.
have to, a tightly like constructed through line story. And I'd say, oh, I see, this singer sings this song and then sings this song, so it's a character. And she would stop and, again, in a Buddha-like way, say, there are no characters. You know, and I was like, wow, okay. So what we came up with as a clothesline on which to hang the songs was a group of people, and we decided on 5, although the piece is modular, it could be done with any number of singers, but we picked 5. A group of people who, at the beginning of the show, are living their lives from a place of fear. And a progression over the course of the show to the last number, where we get that they are learning over the course of the show to live their lives more from a place of love instead of a place of fear. And it's as simple and complicated and profound as that.
It's a wonderful arch, isn't it?
And that's the arc of the show. That's it, you know. And then once we had that, then we just ordered the songs accordingly. And now to speak to your recent question about how, you know, pulling a cast together or doing stuff, I had just come out of a catered fair, in which I had very little control. And because I was the new guy, I was kind of bullied by the music director, who wanted to round off the quirky edges that are me from my songs, and was teaching them wrong and was letting people get away with singing them wrong. And it was just really hard. And I just collapsed into a little ball of jello and just kind of gave up, you know, and, you know, it still turned out fine, but, you know, I just dropped out of the process largely because I was being bulldozed. And so coming out of that, it was very difficult to then jump into another theater experience.
Yeah.
And here we go again. And because these were friends of mine, I went too far in the controlling, where I started to go too far in the controlling direction as a response to having lost control in the previous theatrical experience. So I was like total control freak. And just Daisy, lovely, brilliant, wonderful Daisy, kind of coached me through that and to a place of, again, prying my little fingernails off the songs and letting them breathe as part of this larger structure, and allowing for the wonderful, miraculous idiosyncrasies of each individual performer. And the performers were pretty dazzling.
And
Billy Porter,
wow.
to mention one.
And so when you do that, are you able now to almost kind of breathe and step out of the process and
I'm much better. I'm much, much better. I most recently wrote a piece commissioned by the Boston Gay Men's Chorus. And it's called A Peacock Among Pigeons. It's about a half-hour piece. They commissioned it based on this sweet little children's picture book that has just like a lot of beautiful illustrations, like one line per page of, it's not verbose. It's mostly a picture book, but it's a sweet little story of Peter the Peacock, who finds himself living among a bunch of pigeons who, in fact, bully him for being different. They tell him he's ugly, he's too flamboyant, he's too girly, he doesn't fit in, he's, whatever. And poor little sweet Peter, is heartbroken and tries really hard to fit in. He tries to walk like the pigeons. He puts mud on his colorful feathers so that he can look like the pigeons. The rain washes the mud off and the pigeons make even more fun of him. And he looks in a puddle and he regurgitates what the pigeons say about him. And, they've just so brutalized his self-image that he sees what they see. This garish, gaudy creature that's too girly and whatever. And so eventually he has to leave and go out into the world. And he goes out into the world and he meets other colorful birds. Like he meets a cardinal named Craig. He meets who sings fabulous song about being extraordinary. He meets a canary named Sarah, who sings a song about, relaxing, and it's called Keep It Light. It's like, relax. He meets a neurotic little hummingbird named Henry that actually he helps because Henry is being bullied by these crows. And then finally he meets a wise old owl who, having been through, and each of these characters helps Peter to see how miraculous he is and how valuable he is in his uniqueness. And at the end, the owl says, look in this puddle and tell me what you see. And he sees this magnificent creature. So he is, gotten his self-esteem. I'm so proud of it. And I have a point here, which is the Boston Gay Men's Chorus. I was a part of, I actually managed to get it on paper myself because my beloved Mario died in 2017 at age 53 at a heart attack. But before he died, amazingly, 6 months before he passed, I asked him to show me how not to just play stuff in on computer, but how to get it into the print program. And so we did a couple of songs where I did the whole process and then he critiqued them, which enabled me to now be self-sufficient. And ironically, 6 months later, he died. So I wrote out the whole piece and worked with their arranger and orchestrator on my sketched out ideas as to where the chorus would sing, where the soloist would sing. But I'm not a choral arranger. I didn't know how to, do that. And so he did it. And I got an inkling of what he was doing. And we did go back and forth. But once they were in rehearsal for the piece, they wouldn't let me hear it. they wouldn't send videos of their rehearsals so that I could fine tune it or make changes. They really, I guess they just wanted to be left alone. And it was really hard for me to not say, but what if I want to make changes, or what if I want to rewrite something, or what if there's a harmony that's wrong, or what if there's a, it was kind of a big freak out. And eventually I just thought, well, they're not going to let me in. So I did not hear the piece until I flew to Boston for, they performed it 2 nights in a row. And I didn't hear it till the opening night performance. I had no idea what it was going to be. Luckily, they did a brilliant.
It's a huge relief for you as the person that's created this.
Huge relief.
You can't see John's face, but it's huge relief.
But that's about as right?
Wow.
So that's about as hands off as one can be expected to be. It's like writing a musical, and then they're like, "Well, you'll come to opening night, but you can't come to any of the rehearsals." What? Are you kidding me? But luckily, there was a happy ending, which might have been the universe saying, "Learn to trust, my friend. It's going to be okay." And now we're hoping to do, I'm very excited. It's a little premature to talk about this, but we're going to pitch the piece to PBS. The conductor of the National Symphony Orchestra loves the piece and wants to program it for a gay pride concert in June of 2025, when World Pride is going to be celebrated in Washington, D.C. So he wants to do it in concert at the Kennedy Center with the National Symphony Orchestra. And so far, Billy Porter has, schedule permitting, has agreed to be Craig the Cardinal. Kristen Chenoweth has agreed to be Sarah the Canary, and Brian Stokes Mitchell has agreed to be Owen the Owl. And we haven't cast, the other two, the Hummingbird and Peter yet, but we have some thoughts. And we haven't pitched it to PBS yet, but that's going to happen in a week.
PBS, they're coming.
So it's going to have a bigger life.
I love it, John.
Well, we'll see.
Were you nervous walking into the theater that night, going, "What have they done to this thing?"
Are you kidding? I was a wreck. I was a
You're not a worry at all, John, are you?
Yeah, exactly. You can tell. Well, it's, but you know what it's like? It's like, okay, my baby was born. Immediately, it was taken away from me. And luckily, thank God, that whatever you believe in, they really honored it and did an absolutely fabulous job. And actually, that video of the piece, you may not have discovered it yet, is, guess where? On my Patreon page. You can find it there. A peacock among pigeons. Yeah. Check it out.
What do you want your music to be remembered for? I mean, no, I'm going to ask the first question. I'm going to ask a different question first. No. What's it like being so good at something? I mean, I know you're a very humble man, and I know this will freak you out, this question, but there are not many people that have done what you've done, right? And that's a fact. What's it like being exceptional at something? And I know that you're humble, and I admire you. So.
No, but you know what? I kind of now just comfortably own the fact. It's interesting. When I was starting to do this, I didn't feel exceptional. I felt, or particularly, I mean, I thought I was okay, but I thought that everybody, because I measured myself against Joni Mitchell and Stevie Wonder and Elton John, and those are the people that I compared myself to. And compared to them, and certainly when I started, I wasn't that great. So that'll keep you, when the bar is set that high, that certainly keeps you humble. But, as people have noticed what I do, and as what I do has gotten out into the world, amplified by extraordinary performers and amazing circumstances, I do recognize that I'm good at what I do. And, what I do is write my songs. Nobody else can write.
No.
And I think this is true for every writer. And it's important to remember that, or every creator in any form, that nobody else can do what you do. Nobody else can express what you have to express. So the idea or the ideal, which I just, because I was stubborn, fell into, is to just be the youest that you can be in your art, whatever it is. Or if you're a performer, and I say this because I teach master classes, but only in performance of my own songs. And I did a 4-hour class last night, a Zoom class, which I've been doing a lot of. I'm going to do a class at NIDA while I'm in
lucky
Sydney,
NIDA people.
Where I've been many, many times before. But anyway, and when I say to the kids, to the students, it's just, don't try to homogenize yourself into being, like anybody. Or, I mean, there are aspects of what the people you admire do that you can strive for, like, well, so-and-so is an incredible actor and they've got comedic skills or whatever. You can aspire to that, but don't try to be them. You're only going to be a pale approximation of them, whereas you could be a fabulous version of you. And that's what you go for. And as a writer and listening to other writers, there's so many wannabe Sondheims and it's a trap. And I couldn't listen to his music too much because I could have fallen into it, where you think, oh, that's what good writing sounds like. Well, then I want to do that. No, that's what Sondheim's good writing sounds like. It's not what your good writing sounds like. Your good writing sounds like what comes from the deepest part of you, which you hone and sharpen and polish and work and work and work and work and do it and do it and do it until you're good at it and until your voice is sparkling. That's, the truth, or that's what I believe. So I think that I'm the best writer of John Bucchino songs there could ever be.
I love that. What do you want your music to be remembered for?
I like the idea that it moves people and that it touches on things that are universal that a lot of people can, relate to. And hopefully, kind of a spiritual perspective that I think often the songs come through me from a place that I'm supposed to learn from. That's like sometimes my higher self telling me what I need to hear. So I hope that they resonate in that way for other people, and that there is a, sort of general spiritual, but not in a religious way, but in we're all in this we're all in this together, a commonality of human experience, and just humanity that, we're all in this together. We're all the same, really, in so many ways. We're going through a lot of stuff together. So let's just help each other out and be kind and, not beat each other up, not bully each other. Bullying seems to be a theme here, as it was for me in junior high and the beginning of high school. For poor little Peter the Peacock, which I think is why I resonated so strongly with his piece, because I wrote it from my own experience, and to just let each other be everybody be their unique, wonderful self, whatever color or sexual preference or whatever, and just celebrate that. So all of that is certainly how I feel, and I hope it's infused into my music.
And so having that fan base is too trite. Sorry, having that respect amongst not only your peers and people you've worked with. I mean, you've worked with some incredible people, and they have worked with you. I think equally. That's the point I'm trying to make. But then you've got the I remember when you were out in Australia about 10 years ago, and there was a show you put on at one of the one of the jazz clubs, and some of those folk have gone on to have international careers, for example. Do you look back at some of the work you've done and go, oh wow, that's really resonated with people in a way that you didn't think? Or I mean, I remember taking the wheel. I remember taking the wheel. The Campbell's album, and going. I used to write on a sticky note when I was a political aide in 19 something 2000. Take the wheel, and for me, that's always been, because of your work, that's been a go get.
Oh, that's nice.
But then you've written amazing work.
I do it in a little bedroom, so it's hard. And I know that Steve Sondheim, believe it or not, felt this way too. I can't grasp. I'm always surprised when what I do, when I see the reach of it. For instance, I was I just did a concert in Poland in October, where the singers, they translated, my songs into Polish, and they did a double CD of them, and they wanted me to come and accompany this concert in Polish. It's like, what? How do you even know who I am? And while I was there,
songbook.
I went to It's like, what? I went to Copenhagen, right. And, I got a message from this guy who teaches at a school in Sweden saying, would you come do a master class for us? We love your songs. What? I don't take that for granted. I don't even think really about it until somebody, until it kind of hits me. And of course, it's enormously gratifying. It's wonderful. It's surprising. It's beautiful. It makes me really, really happy.
Well,
it's the best.
As someone who's enjoyed your music over many years, I've always loved taking the wheel. Grateful. I have a bone to pick with you for the amount of times that if I ever say I'm over you has broken my heart. From what wasn't you that broke my heart, but it was someone about 30 years ago.
Well, funny you would mention that song. That's what Mr. Kane Alexander is going to be singing in Tasmania.
And there you go, a preview. John,
I've given too much away.
We've got a PBS exclusive coming up. We've got all this happening. John, what would 21 years... Let's go back. So we're in... Let's wrap this. And thank you again so much for your time and your music. Thank you. I sound like I'm quoting ABBA now. Thank you for your music, but I mean that sincerely. Let's go back in time. So there you are at your 21st.
Thank you for thanking me.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
What would 21-year-olds... So you're back... Let's go back in time. What would your 21-year-old self say to you today? So let's go back to maybe that trip to New York. And you at 21 look forward and go, right.
Yeah.
What would the advice or the reflection be from 21-year-old you to you of 2024?
Okay, first of all, it would be, because there's been a thing on Facebook where people are putting photos of their 21-year-old selves.
You're a good-looking rooster, as we say in Australia, John.
Well, wait. So, thank you. The first thing that I would say to my 21-year-old self is, you're not the ugly duckling you think you are. Because of my just enormous insecurity and shyness and being bullied, and I just had such a terrible self-image. And, so I would say, you're lovely looking, you're talented, it's going to be okay. It's going to get better and better and better and better. And I would say, things that you cannot even conceive of, that are beyond your wildest dreams and different from your wildest dreams, are gonna happen in your life, with your career and personally. And I would say you're going to do 2 projects with Julie Andrews and become dear friends and spend the weekend at her house, and she's going to make you bacon and eggs for breakfast. And that would pretty much or Art Garfunkel is going to, become a dear friend of yours, who I worshipped Simon and Garfunkel. I worshipped The Sound of Music and Julie Andrews. And I think of my 21-year-old self, knew the names that I would be able to drop at this point in
No.
life.
I don't think you've named
He would have been, well, no, but also, it's what that
Yeah.
represents, what that represents. And discovering that these people that I admire, really every one of them, every famous person, that I got to know, has been lovely, wonderful, kind, supportive. That's another great gift to see. I haven't been disappointed in any of them. And it seems that, and I've heard this said before, that the more successful an artist is, often the I'm sure there are some jerks, but
really in theatre,
the more
music.
well, but
there's a lot of
I
egos,
haven't met them. That the more, well, yeah, but that the more successful they are, the kinder and more humble and more wonderful they are.
So, what on that basis, and to finish, what would the John of 2024 say to 21-year-old John? So you're now speaking back to you. You're getting on that flight from LA.
I would say it's going to be okay. If I could just put it in one, you'll be fine.
Take the wheel. You'll be grateful. Sorry, I'm bad puns intended, because it's respectfully your work.
No, it was. If I really had to condense it, it would be, you're going to have a beautiful, fascinating life.
And on that note, John, thank you for your time. Thank you for emailing me back those weeks ago and being so incredibly generous of your time. And thank you for like you said before, and I think it's something that Trent, here I am, a middle-aged, well, it doesn't matter, but, a middle-aged straight guy with married kids in Australia, and your work, like you said, is meant to transcend, is universal. And I think some of the work that you've done, a lot of the work you've done for me as a listener, particularly when I was thinking about how I was going to approach this conversation with you, I've gone back and tried to step out of myself and listen to the music as I understood the context when you were writing it, which I think has provided a lot more depth of my respect for your musicality. But thank you for all the work you've done. You've worked with some amazing people, and as I equally say, they have worked with you, and I'm sure that the people who are going to see you perform, see the work that you'll have performed in Launceston in a month or two will be equally grateful. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us today, and congratulations on a wonderful career and continued success, whatever that may look like, as determined by you and Peter the Peacock.
My great pleasure. Thank you so much.
What an absolute thrill and privilege it was and has been to chat with John. What stood out for me was John's humility, his musicality, and his talent. And what a lovely guy. I really wanted to understand the creative processes that led John to what has been an incredible career. And as we heard, and as is clearly evident, John is an incredible storyteller, with or without music. And his leadership style, as I went away and reflected after I had that conversation with John, comes from knowing himself and being able to communicate that so well. He really does feel things, as he said it. There's a deep well of emotion there, and that goes back way back, as he talked about. He feels the feels, you might say, and that is a talent in its own right. We all have our good days, and we have those times where we step outside the house and look at the sky and think, what on earth am I doing? And that's what John's talent is for me, as I've been trying to work out what I would say to wrap this show up. It's the ability that John has to take those themes, those moments, those feelings, that anguish, that joy, that delight in the world, the whimsical, the going to your counsellor and painting your kitchen. The man has an ability to write and to put yourself in those moments, whoever you are, wherever you are. It's the ability to create those themes, those moments, to literally paint those mind pictures, and for you to be able to transport yourself into your own piece of music which John has helped you create. It's that universal language which we, in our own way, can relate to, which is why, for example, taking the wheel means so much to me as disgraceful, as I've mentioned, or that smile, or if I ever say, because one person's emotions or experiences, as we all feel them, are all very different. But then, as John has been able to do, and the people like David Campbell or Art Garfunkel or Christian Chenoweth, so many countless others have been able to then put their take on it, their life experience, their emotions. And that in itself is a talent. As John said, he has spent a long time trying to let some of that control freakery in his language really be able to wash through him. So I deeply respect people who can start with a blank page. And part of this podcast, the reason I wanted to do this podcast to start with was because of people like John, because I want to learn what it's like to be good at something and brilliant at something, and for someone to be able to sit down with a blank page, be it a journalist or a writer or a musician or an artist, a blank page, a moment of silence in front of that piano and go, what am I going to create? It's a talent, and I am incredibly grateful, pun intended again, for John, for the people who give life to his music, for his time, for his reflections, and most of all, for his kindness, which I think really shone through in that chat. So again, go and listen to John's music. Get on his Patreon page. I really encourage you to do that. Jump on Spotify and spend time. Go down those rabbit warrens of listening to Campbell or a Chenoweth, or you go from a Campbell to a Kane Alexander to a Kane Alexander to a Simon Gleason. Lily's Eyes, actually, although on a slight tangent, Kane Alexander and Simon Gleason's take on Lily's Eyes is up there with the Quast and Warlow version of the 80s in my mind. And Kane Alexander's Broadway album is brilliant. There is some cracking tracks on that album, and I will put the link to that Spotify album there. People who can create, who can feel, who can communicate that emotion have my greatest respect. Go listen to John's music. So thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you to the people who give life to your work. And thank you again for coming on and spending time chatting with me. And to Curse Kids and the Pooch, as well as Darcy and the team, the brilliant team at Pro Podcast Production, of whom I am a very, very happy client. As always, my thanks. And to you, wherever you are, thanks for making the time to learn about John with me. I hope you found it as interesting and as insightful as I did. And my last pun for this extended version of D21 with me, take that wheel, whatever that is for you. Be grateful, but take that wheel and enjoy. Thanks for listening. Go well. Bye for now.
Thanks for joining us today. For more episodes and links, visit dear21yearoldme.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts.